Welcome back to Think Design Work Smart. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming to you from the Mozaic Works studios. First of all, Happy New Year 2023. And since this is the beginning of a new year, I thought we should do a short video discussing what we expect is coming in software development. What are the new trends or the trends that we expect to go on in 2023 in terms of software development? And this is what we will talk about today. Let me share with you, I compiled a list of trends from a number of different articles that I've researched. As you can imagine, there are quite a few articles now about this topic. It's something that's expected to happen in the beginning of a new year. So let's look a bit at trends 2023. First of all, before we move on, these are not in any particular order. And don't take this video as a list of predictions. I don't like to do predictions because, as we know, I think Eisenhower said that predictions are incredibly difficult, especially about the future. So I would rather not make predictions. I'm just observing things that are happening, and based on the information that I have, based on the things that I've seen in organizations, I will try to discuss some of these trends and see a little bit what do we expect? What do we expect to happen in the next year or so? And let's say it's informed guesses. I am not predicting anything. And it's more about opening a conversation with you as well. So I will invite you to write down some comments on this video after you go through it. So let's see. No particular order. Let's start with AI. AI is something that is obviously taking more and more space in software development. We have seen in the past year the advent of GitHub Copilot, and we also see ChatGPT and its ability to find code samples. So what we would expect here is that AI becomes more and more partner for programmers, a partner in terms of software development. Is it there yet? I am not certain. I have not used GitHub Copilot. There are also some legal issues there, and I think that it will be tested legally in a court of law maybe this year. It's likely it will be tested this year. Depends on how fast lawsuits move on. But there are already some lawsuits related to the use of publicly available code and publicly available art and so on in AI systems that compile, will learn from it, and then allow you to generate pictures, code, and so on. So there's a bit of a legal hurdle there, but we are talking about very large companies. It's possible that they will just be able to move over these issues, and in doing so, we will have AI, and I think there's no stopping now. I think the genie is out of the bottle. We will have AI helping programming. Now, where it gets interesting is because AI can be mixed with a bunch of other things. And this is where it gets interesting. So, for example, how about we could use AI to generate test cases? Not necessarily from existing code, but imagine you write a problem and you generate the test cases for that problem using AI. Or even you have an API and you generate tests based on that API. Test cases, not necessarily test code, or even test code at some point. It also gets interesting in terms of another trend, which is no code, low code. With these platforms, what is expected to happen is that they will develop more and more into having AI assistance in the way you can create your no code or low code applications. So a bunch of places where AI fits in, also cybersecurity, which is another trend that we'll talk about. There's obviously a big issue with ransomware attacks in particular, and not only, a lot of cyber attacks. And AI can be used to reduce some of these attacks. Now, I'm a bit wary about AI. Ever since I started programming, AI was touted to be, replacing programmers at some point in time. Is it possible it will replace programmers? I don't think. Definitely not in the next year. And I'm not sure it will ever be able to. One thing about AI is that it tends to evolve in leaps. It took a large leap, like in the 70s when it first started. Then it had a second leap with neural networks in, I think it was 90s or something like that. And now we have a new leap with machine learning and the newest algorithms that allow things like ChatGPT and DALL-E 2 and other things like that. When will this leap end? Or will there be the same leap as before? We don't know, but this leap might end quite soon. And if that leap ends, then we'll once again be on a stable place with AI. Now, with this being said, there are still a lot of places where AI can be used, and there will definitely be, I think, a growth in AI development, but this is quite difficult. I think the processes are not yet there. And unlike software development, we complain in software development that the time to develop things is not predictable. Well, with AI, it's even less predictable because you need your model to get better, and it's kind of like trial and error, more or less. So AI will be a part of software development. The genie is out of the bottle. I think we'll have more and more AI supported tools. But how much? Well, still don't know. We will see. Will it replace programmers? I don't think so. At least not very soon. Could it replace some programming jobs? Possibly. I'm thinking about the particular jobs when you take data from one API and move it to another API inside of an enterprise. These things tend to be quite standardized. So it's possible that in that case you will have more AI supported tools that allow you to just create this easier. Second trend, sustainability. I think it's obvious that we are in the middle of a climate change. We are having issues with energy prices and so on. And I think the time has come for architects to look at carbon and energy consumption, the carbon footprint, the energy consumptions of large applications in particular. If you're just running one small website, not so interesting on one small app or maybe even mobile apps, maybe less so. But whenever we are talking about apps that are used by millions of users, whenever we are talking about a lot of server-side infrastructure in the cloud, or when we talk about enterprises who have their own internal infrastructure like the private clouds, in these cases there will be a focus on reducing energy consumption, reducing carbon footprint. Will it happen this year? Some people say they will. Some of the articles. I'm not sure that we are there yet. I am expecting the large companies to make some statements in this direction at some point, and then slowly the other companies will follow. The way the tech industry works, software development industry works, is that for these kind of things they require additional analysis, additional costs, and another way of looking at your code and your architecture. It takes some time to adopt. So I would expect some companies to start talking about this, and then maybe other companies to follow. There might be some regulation here coming up, maybe not this year, but in the next years. So I'm not sure if it will be something that's really now, but it is something that will happen in the next few years. Cybersecurity, already touched on this. Cybersecurity is about, nowadays it's about protecting against all types of attacks. And we see that there were a lot of ransomware attacks, there were hacks. Twitter was hacked, I think. Once again, I've seen an announcement, and 200 million email addresses were stolen. LastPass also had a few challenges. We had a hack with private vaults stolen. So we see that even large companies who are supposedly good at security have these issues, and many of the tools that we have, many of the services that we use in a more and more interconnected world are prone to these attacks. So I expect more attention to be placed on cybersecurity. This means more specialized people, more risk analysis, but also tools. And I was mentioning AI. I've seen a Gartner strategy report for 2023, and they are talking about an immune system for digital, for applications basically, and for services. And what this means is to have a combination of things like observability, AI, self-repair, site reliability engineering, chaos engineering, all these being put together and combined in something that becomes effectively an automated system for protecting your services. This is not a new notion, it's actually quite old as an idea. And it's also based on automated testing, tests that would be run as monitoring periodically to test for security breaches. This is where AI could be very helpful. Imagine you could get some automated tests that are ran from time to time against your live services to test for potential security issues. This would save a lot of time. And it's something that I think AI can do quite well, because after all, with cybersecurity, there are a few patterns that cover, let's say, 70-80% of the issues, of the problems that lead to hacks. So I think you could test for that with AI, and you can also do it today by writing automated tests, running them as monitoring from time to time against your real live product. But there's still some challenges there. I mean, there's quite a lot of work to be done in that area, particularly if you start from scratch. So I would expect things to move forward here. Will they move forward this year in a relevant manner? I'm not sure. Maybe some AI-based tools like ChatGPT was a surprise for me at the end of last year. So maybe something like this will come up during this year for cybersecurity. The next one is cloud computing. This is pretty obvious. Everybody's using the cloud in a form or another. And adoption is expected to increase. Remote work has led to more adoption for cloud systems. So this is quite obvious. Things will move forward here, and you have the big competitors, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Red Hat, IBM, who will compete on these fronts. I have no idea who will win. AWS, as far as I know, is still the leader, but it's things are moving forward. So cloud is expected to be here for a long period of time, and much more development will happen in the cloud. Microservices, based on some of the things that I've read, it seems that microservices are moving to become a kind of a standard for enterprises. And I think that, there are a few reasons why microservices are quite good in this context. It's because you can develop them relatively quickly, you can parallelize work and so on. Now, the problem that I see with microservices is that the architectures that I've seen are not particularly good at taking the most advantage from microservices as it is possible. One common problem here is having microservices that depend one on another. and they are not decoupled. Instead, they depend directly from another microservice. And when you have 700 microservices, you need to change one of them, and then this triggers changes in like 50 other microservices. This is what we used to call in Windows dependency hell. In Windows, we had the same problem. We had DLLs, dynamic library files, and they would be dependent on one another, and applications would be dependent on DLLs, and then one application would overwrite a DLL and break a ton of other applications. Microsoft then got smarter and introduced side-by-side versioning, which basically meant that you could run two DLLs with the same name but two different versions side by side, which meant that when one application needed a newer version, older applications could still use the older version of the DLL. And at least this wasn't breaking and would allow us to deploy independently, without synchronizing between different applications, which was impossible for an operating system. But for microservices, I've seen this a lot, and I think it's a big problem. Also, the idea of microservices, I think we gave up on the idea of having very small services, and what we understand by microservices nowadays, or what most architectures that I've seen understand by microservices, is larger things. This is not necessarily a problem, but the problem is to figure out what is a good split for your context. And this is ideally done using domain-driven design type of modeling. And to try to optimize towards certain desirable characteristics for architecture. And in this case, we would be talking about independent deployability and side-by-side versioning and things like that, that would allow us to move very quickly in parallel without a lot of coordination between different teams. So my team should be able to deploy our microservice that we are responsible for, a new version, without breaking anything else. And if another team needs the new features, they can always ask for the new features. And this is possible by using decoupling mechanisms like event buses and things like that, message passing, message queues. But it's, of course, it's a problem with performance. So you need to balance these things. Do you need something to move very fast or not? There are also challenges with distributed transactions with microservices. Ideally, you would not want to use distributed transactions. Sometimes you need to, but ideally you shouldn't. So there are all these things, and you could avoid distributed transactions in many situations by changing a bit your architecture or relaxing some of the constraints that you have on your architecture. So this is a very, very complex topic, and I think as an industry, at least based on the architectures that I've seen, we are not yet at the point where we can use microservices in a way that they can be used. Now, it's interesting that I've seen something related to this platform, Teams. there's a trend for organizations to introduce, basically to reintroduce platform teams that develop services, APIs that the rest of the organizations can use. I find this very funny because this is another cycle in the software development industry. We used to have framework teams who develop a framework that the rest of the organization would use, like in the 90s, in the 2000s. And then we ended up, so like 20 years later, we go back to having the same thing but with a different name. It probably makes sense because by now organizations have figured out what are, let's say, core services that they can reuse between different parts of the organization, but they will come with their own challenges. And I think one of the things that's interesting with microservices is that you could write microservices that solve the same problem but have different operational capabilities. Imagine you would have one microservice. Let's just take a simple example, a list of people, right? You have email, first name, last name, and it's not the best example, but because it's not something that you want to have in a microservice. You do want to have behavior rather than data. But let's just consider this for a moment. Imagine that you have this microservice and then you have different versions. One of them that can deliver you up to 10,000 people or lists of people with a specific delay, let's say 10 millisecond answer. And then you'd have an operational profile for that. So how does it scale based on the number of requests? How does this scale? How does the response time change? And then you'd have another implementation of the same microservice, but that can deal with 1 million items in the list, and with another scalability profile, and so on. And then you'd pick the one that best fits your context within your organization. I think there's a big possibility here to start standardizing some of the things that we are doing again and again. And microservices offer this possibility, and maybe this standardization will come from platform teams. Let's stick to the technical topics. Containers. Containers are here to stay. And apparently, based on some things that I've read, there's a switch happening from, or expected from, Docker to Kubernetes. More and more people are using Kubernetes. I think part of it is also the Red Hat platform that OpenShift, I was trying to remember, OpenShift that allows you, has been adopted by many organizations and basically uses Kubernetes behind the scenes. So yeah, not much to say here other than we will have more containers. And I've seen in some ideas like Visual Studio Code now has an option to run directly in container and have development containers actually, which is really great because you can replicate the development environment between different developers. Very cool. So yeah, containers here to stay. They will develop some more. I don't think there's anything controversial about this. It's probably expected. We talked a bit about no code and low code. We expect, based on what I've read, the expectation here is that this platform will continue to grow. They will continue to be used. Now I have a bit of a problem with these platforms, and I think they can bring a lot of value, particularly when you combine them with AI. So maybe you could generate your applications also using some AI. But the big problem that I've seen and that nobody is answering is, how do we test these things? Because it's not enough to build the applications, right? We also need to test it, and testing will still be a big issue. And there's no good answer that I can see with no code, low code platforms. With this being said, I still think they are extremely useful. I would use them for prototyping. It's a no-brainer, I think, to use this platform when you want to try out a new product. Just develop it first using no code, low code. Test it out with users, maybe even get some paying users, and in the meantime move to something that you can control a little bit better. I'm also worried a bit about security here. As we have seen, even the people who should be good at security are not that good at security. So how are these platforms in terms of security? I have no idea. It's very hard to tell, and it's probably too early to tell. Another thing, metaverse. This is something that has been trending for a while. And I think here there are two different things, at least. I mean, metaverse is a huge thing, but I'm not so interested in the Facebook type of metaverse where you would go and work in a virtual office with a VR headset. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But what is very interesting is industrial metaverse. And I've learned while doing research for this video that Siemens is actually investing in an industrial metaverse. And that makes a lot of sense, because for a lot of complex devices, like imagine trains or medical devices, or there's a lot of training that you can do, and you can do it much better with VR. So it makes a lot of sense to have some kind of VR way of training people, and then why not even using those devices remotely in a secure way from a secure platform. It will still be a lot of work to be done here, but I think that metaverse for industrial applications is something that we will see more and more. I'm not so interested in the other type of metaverse. And since I'm here with metaverse, let me quickly talk about blockchain, because that's another topic that's been discussed again and again in the past years. I used to think that blockchain it's a good way of storing, and this is its strength. It's a good way of storing read-only data that is almost guaranteed that it doesn't change. So you can store something, let's say an ownership kind of contract, and nobody can change that. Official papers, things like that. And whenever you change it, you need to store a new version of it, and you can see the changes and so on. So this is something where blockchain is very useful. However, it has a big problem, and the big problem is if you don't store the right thing from the beginning, it doesn't have the right thing in it. So I'm not so sure anymore that blockchain is that useful for infrastructure things, because the inputs determine what goes into the blockchain, and you can always play the system, game the system, and store something that's wrong if you want to abuse it. So it's a bit a weird topic, right? But it's interesting to see what will happen with blockchain. Okay, so let's talk about the last two things. Programming languages. There seem to be some changes here. Python has grown. I think Python has grown mostly because of data analysis. It has a lot of useful tools for AI, for big data, things like that. So this is probably why. It is a nice language. I'm still having, I'm still unhappy with packaging. We should have a simple way of packaging Python applications easier than we have now, and in a way that works with the virtual development environments and all that. It's not as easy as it should be. It should be much easier. But other than that, yeah, the language is nice. There are a lot of tools for it. It has a lot of things that you can use. So really good. Rust has grown. In a year, it has kept 20 places in the TIOB popularity index for programming languages. And I think on one hand, this is because Microsoft is now investing a lot in Rust. Now, Rust has come as a replacement for C++. People have been talking about C++ replacements for a very long time, and C++ is still here. So I'm not sure that Rust will replace C++ soon, but I think for some developments, Rust will be preferred over C++. I'm still interested in seeing what will happen here, because the TIOB index is more about popularity, it's not necessarily about the code written, right? It's about how popular the language is. JavaScript is still here to stay, growing, is still being used for a lot of things. And I think, I've said it before, I think JavaScript as a language, I have no problem with it. But JavaScript as an environment, as the whole set of libraries and all the things that come with it, I don't quite like it. Too many small libraries, too many libraries dependent on one another. It looks a bit messy to me, and it's not necessarily about aesthetics, it's more about risks. There are a lot of risks, I think. I always feel uneasy when I have to use a lot of different JavaScript packages for something that should be very simple. I mean, for everything that you want to do with JavaScript is install Node, and from Node install one library that requires 200 other things. It's a kind of a mess. I would rather have well-tested, secured but fewer libraries. And this is where I'm having a bit of a problem with the JavaScript environment, the JavaScript ecosystem. This would be a better way of putting it. All right, and the last trend that we'll be talking about is job market and outsourcing. Last year, I think for the first time in many years, all the big companies have fired developers. And this is a trend that, is showing us, I think is showing us that the job market might be changing. And what I mean by this is that until recently, large companies have always pushed for more developers, more developers, more developers. Throwing people at the problems and trying to fix whatever problems they are having by bringing more developers in. I'm feeling a shift towards improved organization, improved processes, better developers. So I fear that these things might change. And it's possible that we'll see more developers being pushed out of companies as they are looking at optimizing the way they work. I'm not sure this will happen, obviously, but it is something that might happen. And the way you could deal with that is by learning and by becoming more valuable and preparing for a market where people are looking for developers who can solve problems and do end-to-end things, from understanding a problem, designing, maybe a little bit of architecture, a little bit of design, testing, and then having things in production, monitoring, fixing bugs, ideally preventing bugs. At the same time, there is a need for programmers in certain areas and for specialists in certain areas. Like in AI, there are not enough people, cloud, not enough people. So there are some areas where we might see more outsourcing. So yeah, this is what I have seen from my research, and I think these are my opinions right now about these trends. As I said, these are not predictions, just things that you might want to think about relating to your career and to what you want to do next, and do a bit more research on your end, figure out what you'd like to learn more. If you find this video valuable, leave us a comment. We also love to have likes, shares, subscribes, of course, but leave us a comment. Are these trends something that you see in your own organizations? Have you tried to switch jobs, and what did you find out? What are people looking for? Let us know in the comments, or if you see any other trends that we haven't touched on here, or if I'm completely wrong about something, let me know. Thank you so much for the view. Have a very happy new year. See you on a regular schedule from now on in 2023. And until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.